Samantha adjusted her crisp navy uniform, smoothing out any wrinkles before stepping into the first-class cabin with her usual confidence. She had been a flight attendant for nearly a decade and prided herself on delivering flawless service to premium passengers. Her sharp eyes scanned the luxurious cabin, ensuring every detail was perfect, pillows fluffed, glasses polished, and every passenger greeted with warm, personal attention. Today would be no different. As she moved down the aisle, her attention flickered to a man sitting near the window in the first row. He was tall, with a composed demeanor, dressed in a well-tailored charcoal suit, his posture relaxed but upright as he thumbed through a stack of documents. Something about him gave off an air of quiet authority, but Samantha didn't dwell on it. She had already made her assessment. Instead, she turned her attention to another passenger, a middle-aged man in a crisp golf polo adjusting his carry-on in the overhead bin. "Good morning, sir," Samantha greeted him warmly, handing him a complimentary drink with a radiant smile. "Let me know if there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable." The man chuckled and thanked her before taking his seat, seemingly pleased with the special attention. From the corner of her eye, Samantha noticed the first-row passenger lift his hand slightly, signaling for service. She hesitated. For a split second, she debated whether to acknowledge him, but quickly decided otherwise. Instead, she turned toward another passenger, this time a well-dressed woman, flipping through a glossy magazine. The request from the quiet man went unanswered. She justified her decision without much thought. After all, first-class passengers exuded a certain presence, a specific image, and something about him didn't quite fit the mold. Perhaps he was an upgrade, she mused, or a last-minute addition. Samantha had seen it before, travelers who didn't seem to belong in these elite seats. She wasn't being rude, just prioritizing, she told herself. The man exhaled softly, lowering his hand, his expression unreadable as he turned back to his documents. Samantha busied herself with her usual rounds, her polished professionalism on full display as she served champagne and engaged in light conversation with passengers. The cabin hummed with quiet luxury, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the subtle fragrance of expensive cologne. Everything was running smoothly, just the way she liked it. But when she passed by the first-row passenger again, she caught the briefest flicker of disappointment in his gaze. "Excuse me." His voice was calm, refined, carrying a quiet strength rather than demand. "Could I get some water, please?" Samantha halted briefly. There was nothing wrong with the request, yet she felt the smallest pang of irritation. Something about the way he carried himself unsettled her. Not confrontational, but not meek either. She gave him a quick nod but didn't offer a smile. Instead of fetching the water herself, she turned to a junior attendant nearby. "Can you handle that?" she mumbled, already walking away. By the time the man received his water, his demeanor remained unchanged, calm, unbothered. But the subtle tension in the air was unmistakable. Samantha didn't dwell on it. There were other passengers to attend to, ones she felt more inclined to interact with. The man in the first row was just another face, and as long as he wasn't causing trouble, she saw no reason to offer more than the bare minimum. She continued her routine seamlessly, weaving through the aisle with effortless charm. She refilled drinks, fluffed pillows, and ensured that everyone was comfortable. But she meticulously avoided engaging with him. Not once did she ask if he needed anything else, nor did she make eye contact when she passed his row. Yet every time she glanced in his direction, briefly, fleetingly, she found him observing. Not staring, not glaring, just watching. It made her uneasy. As she adjusted the overhead compartments before meal service, she overheard a whispered conversation between two passengers behind her. "I think he might be someone important," one murmured. "Yeah," the other agreed. "He's got that presence, you know." Samantha's brow furrowed slightly. Who were they talking about? Her curiosity flared, but she shook it off. It didn't matter. He was just a passenger. Nothing more. But something lingered, a nagging feeling she couldn't quite shake. Midway through the flight, an older gentleman sitting a few rows back flagged her down. He had a kind face, deep wrinkles lining his skin like a map of stories untold. "Miss," he said in a low voice, nodding toward the first-row passenger. "I believe that gentleman hasn't been served properly. I've noticed you skipped over him more than once." Samantha's stomach tightened. "Oh," she replied quickly, pasting on her practiced smile. "I must have overlooked him. I'll check on him now." The older man gave her a pointed look, but she turned away before it could settle. Taking a steadying breath, she approached the first row seat, her steps measured. "Sir," she said with a forced pleasantness, "is there anything else you need at the moment?" The man looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time. There was no hostility, no challenge, just quiet observance. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "I'm fine, thank you," he said, his tone polite but firm. "You've been very attentive to everyone else, though. I appreciate your thoroughness." A chill crawled down Samantha's spine. Was he being sarcastic? His tone suggested otherwise, but his words left an uncomfortable weight in the air. She struggled for a response, suddenly feeling the shift in power. "Well, if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask," she said quickly, before retreating. Her heart pounded as she returned to the galley, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. She wasn't sure why the exchange had rattled her. Maybe it was because, deep down, she knew. She knew that she had been unfair, that her decision to ignore him hadn't been conscious malice, but something even more insidious, an assumption. She had assumed he didn't belong. And the worst part, he knew it too. As the flight neared its descent, Samantha moved through the cabin, preparing for landing. When she reached the first row, she hesitated, feeling his gaze on her once more. Their eyes met just for a second, and in that moment she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the plane touched down on the runway, Samantha let out a quiet breath of relief. Another flight completed, another flawless service. At least that's what she told herself. Despite a few minor hiccups, like the lingering tension with the first row passenger, everything had gone smoothly, and soon she would be off duty. The passengers began filing out, exchanging pleasantries as they departed. Samantha stood near the exit, offering polite goodbyes, her usual bright, professional smile plastered across her face. She had nearly forgotten about him, the man she had subtly disregarded throughout the flight. But as he stepped forward, her stomach twisted. His gaze met hers, steady, unreadable. "Thank you for the flight," he said simply, his tone neutral, but carrying an undeniable weight. Something about his voice sent a ripple of unease through her. He wasn't angry, he wasn't smug, but there was something knowing in the way he looked at her, as if he had seen straight through her. Samantha forced a polite nod. "Of course, sir. Have a wonderful day." She watched as he disappeared into the terminal, exhaling in relief. That was it. He was gone. But the unease in her chest remained. After the last passenger left, the crew began their post-flight duties, securing the cabin, collecting service items, and preparing for the standard debriefing. Samantha was eager to finish up and go home, shake off the strange tension from the flight, and move on. She strode into the crew lounge, where the rest of her team gathered for their post-flight meeting. Their supervisor, Mr. Reynolds, stood at the front, clipboard in hand, his usual no-nonsense expression in place. But today there was something different in his posture, something unusually formal. "All right, team, before we begin our debrief, I have an important announcement," Mr. Reynolds started, clearing his throat. "As you know, our airline has been working on improving leadership within our crew structure. We're focusing on service excellence, professionalism, and ensuring that our passengers receive the highest quality experience." Samantha barely listened. She tapped all her fingers against the table, impatient to get through the meeting. But then, "With that said, I'd like to introduce someone who will be playing a significant role in those efforts. Our new regional manager has been closely observing operations, and he's here to formally introduce himself." The door opened. Samantha turned to look, and her breath stopped cold. Stepping inside, composed and confident, was the first row passenger, the man she had ignored. A hushed murmur spread through the room as all eyes turned to him. Samantha's pulse thundered in her ears. "Good afternoon," the man spoke, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had unsettled her on the plane. "My name is Nathaniel Carter, and as of today, I am officially assuming the position of regional manager for this airline." Samantha felt the world tilt. Every inch of her body went rigid. No, this couldn't be real. It couldn't be, but it was. Nathaniel Carter, the man she had dismissed, ignored, barely acknowledged, was not just some ordinary passenger. He was her new boss, and he had seen everything. Her skin burned hot, then cold. Every moment from the flight replayed in her mind like a cruel joke. The raised hand she ignored. The water request she pushed off. The way she chose to prioritize other passengers while pretending he didn't exist. Oh God, she had been caught. Not by a customer who would forget by the time they reached baggage claim. Not by some VIP who might write a complaint that would get lost in the corporate shuffle. But by the regional manager himself, a man with the power to end her career. Nathaniel continued, addressing the room. I had the opportunity to experience firsthand how our crew operates during flights. Observation is a key part of leadership, and I wanted to see for myself what kind of team I would be working with. Samantha could barely breathe. Nathaniel's gaze swept across the room and landed on her. Her stomach dropped. He knew. He knew. His eyes didn't linger, but the weight of his glance sent panic clawing up her throat. She needed to get out of there, needed to leave before the walls collapsed around her. Nathaniel continued, I must say I witnessed a range of behaviors today, some excellent, some that left room for improvement. His voice was smooth, controlled, but there was an unmistakable sharpness beneath the surface. I believe in accountability, and I believe in giving people the chance to grow. That's what real leadership is about. Samantha wanted to disappear. She barely heard the rest of his speech. Her ears rang, her palms felt damp, and her heart pounded like a drum. When the meeting adjourned, crew members whispered excitedly, exchanging glances, eager to impress their new boss. Some murmured about how powerful he seemed. Others noted how calm yet authoritative he was. Samantha just sat there, frozen in her chair, unable to move. She had worked so hard to maintain her image as a top-tier flight attendant. And in one flight, in one series of unconscious choices, she had potentially thrown it all away. A hand suddenly rested on her chair. She jerked, whipping around. Nathaniel Carter stood beside him. For the first time since his arrival, he was speaking directly to her. Samantha, he said evenly, his voice betraying nothing. Not anger, not amusement, just pure, unreadable authority. Her throat went dry. Yes, sir? She croaked. He studied her as if deciding something. Then finally, I'd like a word with you, he said, privately. The air left her lungs. Nathaniel didn't wait for a response. He turned, walking toward the exit. Samantha sat there, feeling exposed, vulnerable, and utterly powerless. She didn't know what was waiting for her in that conversation. Discipline, termination, a reprimand she'd never recover from. All she knew was one thing. She had underestimated the wrong person. And now, she was going to pay for it. Samantha followed Nathaniel into a quiet, windowless office near the crew lounge. The walk there had felt impossibly long, every step heavier than the last. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. The air inside the room felt thick, suffocating, and Samantha struggled to steady her breathing as she took the seat he gestured toward. Nathaniel closed the door behind them with a quiet click, then leaned against the desk, arms crossed, watching her. For the first time since the flight, she had no distractions, no escape, just him and the truth hanging between them like an axe. Samantha straightened her posture, clasping her hands together in her lap to stop them from trembling. Sir, she started, forcing her voice to sound steady. Nathaniel lifted a hand, cutting her off. Before you say anything, I want to make one thing clear. His voice was calm, controlled, but the weight of it pressed against her like a storm cloud. I'm not here to embarrass you or make this personal, but we do need to talk about what happened on that flight. Samantha swallowed hard, nodding. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, his gaze unreadable. You've been with this airline for a while now, correct? Yes, sir. 8 years. 8 years, he echoed, nodding slowly. So in 8 years, what have you learned about service? Samantha blinked. The question caught her off guard. I've learned that service is about making sure passengers are comfortable, that their needs are met. Nathaniel arched a brow. All passengers? Her breath caught in her throat. He let the silence stretch, watching as realization dawned in her eyes. Samantha lowered her gaze. The shame burned through her, hotter than anything she'd felt before. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now. I want you to think back to that flight. Not just the moments you served passengers, but the ones where you didn't. The moments where you made a choice, even if it was subconscious, to treat someone differently. Do you see it? Samantha clenched her jaw, willing herself to keep her composure. I didn't mean to be disrespectful, she said quietly. I don't think you did, Nathaniel admitted. But that's the problem, isn't it? Her head snapped up, meeting his gaze again. It wasn't something you thought about, he continued. It wasn't some deliberate act of cruelty, and yet you still made that choice. Samantha's chest tightened. I sat in that seat for hours, Nathaniel went on, his voice still even. I watched you smile at other passengers, offer them drinks, engage them in conversation, make them feel seen. I watched you prioritize them, all while avoiding me. Not because I was rude, not because I was difficult, but because I didn't fit the image of who you thought belonged in that seat. The words landed like blows, because they were true. A lump formed in her throat. I, I don't know why I did that, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel studied her for a moment before pushing off the desk and sitting down across from her. I'm not here to punish you, Samantha, he said, his voice gentler now. I know you're not a bad person, but I need you to understand something. This job isn't just about serving drinks and smiling. It's about respect. It's about dignity. It's about treating every passenger like they belong. She felt something inside her crack. I never thought of myself as someone who... She stopped, biting her lip. She couldn't say it, couldn't admit the word bias out loud. But Nathaniel understood. It's easy to think that bias only exists in obvious hateful ways, he said. But the truth is it's often much quieter. It's in the small decisions, the unconscious choices. And that's why we have to actively work against it. Samantha looked down, tears burning at the edges of her vision. She had spent years perfecting her role, being the best, the most polished. And yet, in one flight, she had been forced to see something ugly about herself, something she had never acknowledged before. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. I could write you up for this, he admitted. I could file a formal complaint, note that you failed to uphold company values, and to be honest, it would be justified. Her heart stopped. But, he let the word hang, making her lift her head. I believe in second chances if, and only if, the person receiving it is willing to change. A single tear slipped down Samantha's cheek. She quickly wiped it away. I don't want to be the kind of person who makes those kinds of assumptions, she said, voice raw. Then don't be, Nathaniel said simply. It's a choice you make every day, every flight, every passenger you serve. Samantha inhaled shakily. What do I need to do? Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, considering her for a moment. Then he nodded. You're going to take a leadership training course specifically on unconscious bias and passenger experience. And for the next several flights, I'll be keeping an eye on your service. Not because I want to catch you failing, but because I want to see you succeed. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts. A part of her had expected immediate punishment, maybe even termination. But instead, he was giving her a chance to be better. She met his eyes, truly met them this time. I won't waste this chance, she promised. Nathaniel held her gaze for a long moment before finally nodding. Good, then let's see what you do with it. As she left the office, her mind swirled with emotions. Shame, gratitude, determination. She had messed up, deeply. But instead of being crushed beneath the weight of her mistake, she had been given the opportunity to grow. And for the first time in a long time, Samantha wasn't just thinking about being a good flight attendant. She was thinking about being a better person. Samantha sat in the crew lounge, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her conversation with Nathaniel replayed over and over in her mind. Every word, every moment he had forced her to confront a truth she had spent her entire career ignoring. She had been wrong, not just on that flight, but probably many times before. The thought made her stomach twist. How many passengers had she made feel invisible? How many times had she dismissed someone without even realizing it? Nathaniel had given her a second chance, one she hadn't expected, one she didn't deserve, but one she was determined not to waste. That first shift after their conversation felt like walking on a tightrope. The moment she stepped onto the plane, she felt the weight of Nathaniel's words pressing down on her. This time, she didn't just go through the motions, she paid attention. Every greeting, every smile, every interaction, she forced herself to be present, to see each passenger for who they were, not who she thought they should be. It was harder than she expected. Old habits fought against her. She caught herself hesitating, almost walking past a passenger who seemed out of place in first class, almost prioritizing someone who fit the usual mold. Almost. But then she would hear Nathaniel's voice in her head. Service isn't just about smiling, it's about dignity. So she stopped herself. She adjusted. And with each course correction, she felt something shift inside her. Midway through the flight, a woman in a simple black dress raised her hand hesitantly. She looked uncomfortable, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to ask for assistance. Samantha's old self might have waited, might have served others first, might have assumed she didn't belong. But not this time. She went straight to her. Straight to. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" Samantha asked, her voice warm, genuine. The woman's face lit up with relief. "Oh yes, just some water if it's not too much trouble." "Of course, I'll be right back," Samantha said. She returned quickly, offering the glass with a kindness she wished she had always practiced. The woman hesitated before taking it, then said softly, "I've flown first class before, but you're the first flight attendant who's really looked at me when speaking." Samantha's breath caught. The woman noticed. All those years of not seeing, of not acknowledging, passengers had felt it. They always had. A lump formed in her throat, but she smiled. "Well, I hope I can change that experience for you today." The woman smiled back, gratitude in her eyes. As Samantha walked away, she felt it, something growing inside her, the need to do better. But growth didn't come without struggle. Later in the flight, an older businessman snapped at her when his drink wasn't refilled quickly enough. "First-class service is supposed to be impeccable, not this half-hearted nonsense," he scoffed. Samantha's first instinct was to go back to her old ways, apologize quickly, prioritize his needs, ensure the important passengers were pleased first, but she stopped herself. No, she had just spent the last few hours learning to see every passenger as equal. She wasn't going to let someone like this make her regress. "I apologize for the delay, sir," she said firmly but professionally. "I'll take care of that for you now." She turned, refilled his drink, and moved on. Because every passenger deserved respect. But that didn't mean she had to cater to entitlement. By the time the flight landed, Samantha felt drained. But for the first time in a long time, it was a good kind of exhaustion, a meaningful kind. As passengers disembarked, a man she hadn't spoken much to paused at the exit. "I just wanted to say," he said, "I noticed how attentive you were today." It didn't go unnoticed. Samantha blinked. He wasn't just thanking her for a drink or a smile. He was thanking her for treating people with dignity. And that, she realized, meant more than any first-class upgrade, any five-star rating. Later, as she sat in the crew lounge, she let out a slow breath. Today had been hard. But for the first time in years, she felt like she had done her job right. She had made someone feel seen. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see herself too. Samantha moved through the cabin with a quiet focus, her heart steady but her mind racing. She was changing, she could feel it, but she also knew that true change didn't happen overnight. It was in the small moments, the deliberate choices, and the silent promises to herself to do better, to be better. And today was another test. As she reached row 16, she spotted an elderly man gripping his armrest tightly, his knuckles pale from the pressure. His eyes flickered between the window and the seatbelt sign, his entire body tense. He was terrified. Samantha crouched beside him, lowering herself to his level. "Sir," she said gently, offering a warm smile. "First time flying?" The man swallowed hard, nodding. "Second time," he admitted, "but the first was over 40 years ago." Shaw, his voice wavered. I don't like not having my feet on the ground." Samantha felt his fear, raw, unguarded. She had seen nervous flyers before, but this time she saw them differently. They weren't just passengers, they were people with fears, hopes, and stories she would never fully know. "I understand," she said softly. "It can feel overwhelming." She glanced out the window, then back at him. "But you're safe. The pilots are some of the best, and the crew is here to take care of you." He exhaled shakily, nodding. "Can I get you some water?" she offered. "Yes," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Samantha returned with the water in seconds, watching as he took slow sips, his hands still trembling, but slightly steadier than before. "Would you like me to check on you during the flight?" she asked. "Just a quick wave when I pass by." The man's eyes filled with gratitude, and he nodded again. I'd appreciate that. Thank you, miss. You're very kind. Samantha felt something warm bloom in her chest. Kind. That word meant more to her now than it ever had before. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. Another situation was unfolding. 2 rows ahead, a mother was struggling with a fussy baby. The infant's cries pierced through the low hum of the cabin, drawing irritated looks from nearby passengers. The mother looked exhausted, rocking her child desperately, her face flushed with stress. Samantha didn't hesitate. She approached with care, knowing that a stressed parent didn't need judgment. They needed support. Would you like some help? She asked softly. The mother looked up, surprised. I don't want to be a bother, she stammered. You're not a bother, Samantha reassured her. We've all been there. The woman hesitated, then nodded, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. Samantha gently extended her arms. May I hold her for a moment while you get settled? The mother hesitated again, then with a deep breath, handed her baby over. Samantha cradled the infant, rocking gently, murmuring soft reassurances. The baby's cries slowed, then softened, then stopped. The mother let out a deep sigh of relief. Oh my God, I don't know how you did that. Samantha chuckled softly. It's a gift. She winked. The mother smiled for the first time since boarding. Other passengers who had been shooting annoyed glances moments ago now looked at Samantha with appreciation. One even murmured, that was impressive. Samantha handed the now sleepy baby back to her mother, who looked as if she might cry from gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Samantha simply smiled. You're doing great. As she walked back to the galley, she felt different, not just because she had helped, but because, for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later, as the plane landed, passengers began gathering their things, stretching, and preparing to leave. As they passed Samantha, something unexpected happened. The elderly man from row 16 stopped beside her and gently patted her hand. You made this flight easier for me, he said. I just wanted you to know that. Samantha's throat tightened. A few steps behind him, the mother with the baby smiled warmly. If more flight attendants were like you, flying wouldn't feel so stressful, she said sincerely. And then, something even more surprising. Passengers started thanking her, not just for the drinks or the food or the routine service, for the way she had treated them, for the kindness she had shown. As she stood at the exit, Nathaniel, who had been on the flight, observing silently, approached her. She braced herself, expecting another critique, another lesson, but instead he smiled. Good work today, he said. You're starting to get it. Samantha's breath caught. He noticed. Her chest swelled, not with pride, but with something stronger. Purpose. She was changing, not just for herself, but for every passenger who needed to be seen. And she wasn't going back. Samantha had always been taught to stay professional, stay neutral. Passengers came and went, and it wasn't her job to get involved in personal conflicts. At least, that's what she had always believed. But that belief was about to be tested. Halfway through a long-haul flight, Samantha was making her way down the aisle when she overheard a hushed conversation that made her blood run cold. She doesn't even look like she belongs here, a woman murmured, her voice dripping with disdain. Yeah, you'd think first class would have better standards, her seatmate scoffed. Samantha's stomach twisted as she stole a glance at the subject of their whispers, a young black woman sitting quietly in her seat, staring out the window, pretending not to hear. But Samantha saw the way her hands clenched in her lap, the slight tension in her shoulders, the silent weight of being treated like an outsider in a space where she belonged. Samantha's fingers tightened around the tray she was holding. Do I let it go? A few months ago, she would have. She would have kept walking, convincing herself it wasn't her place, that it was just another uncomfortable moment in a world full of them. But not anymore. She had changed. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be treated as less than, and she refused to let it happen on her watch. Taking a deep breath, she turned back toward the 2 whispering passengers. I couldn't help but overhear, she said, keeping her voice calm but firm. I just want to remind you that every passenger in this cabin has the right to be here and deserves to be treated with respect. The woman's eyes widened. Excuse me? She said, her voice sharp, indignant. Samantha didn't flinch. "There is no room for discrimination on this flight," she said, making sure her words were loud enough for others to hear. "If I hear any more inappropriate remarks, I'll have to notify the captain." Passengers nearby turned to look, their eyes flicking between Samantha and the two offenders. The atmosphere shifted, a silent but unmistakable wave of accountability settling over the space. The woman's face flushed red and she sputtered, we were just talking. You're misunderstanding." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "No," she said simply. "I understood perfectly." The man beside the woman let out a frustrated sigh, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Look, we didn't mean anything by it," he muttered. "Just drop it." Samantha didn't move. She let the silence stretch, allowing them to feel the weight of their own words. Finally, the woman huffed and looked away, crossing her arms like a child who had been scolded. Satisfied, Samantha turned toward the young woman by the window. She bent down slightly and offered the kind of smile she wished she had given more freely in the past. "Can I get you anything?" she asked, her voice softer now. "A drink? A blanket?" The young woman looked at her, really looked at her. For a moment, she said nothing, just searching Samantha's face as if trying to decide whether to believe what had just happened. Finally, she exhaled and gave a small, grateful smile. "I'm okay," she said quietly. "But thank you." Samantha felt that thank you settle deep in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude for the offer of a drink. It was gratitude for being seen, for not being alone in that moment, for knowing that someone had been willing to stand up for her when it would have been easier to stay silent. Samantha nodded, resisting the urge to say more. She didn't need to. The moment had spoken for itself. As she walked back to the galley, her heart pounded. She half expected to get pulled aside by another passenger, to be scolded for causing a scene or overreacting. But instead, a man seated a few rows away gave her a small nod of approval as she passed. An older woman, clutching her purse in her lap, murmured, "Good for you, dear." Even a flight attendant from another section leaned in when Samantha reached the galley and whispered, "That was brave." Samantha let out a slow breath, steadying herself. Brave. She had never thought of herself that way before, but maybe she was finally becoming the kind of person who deserved that word. When the flight landed and passengers began to disembark, Samantha stood by the door, saying her usual polite goodbyes. And then, just as she thought the moment had passed, the young black woman stopped beside her. She didn't say anything right away, but then quietly she whispered, "I appreciate what you did." Samantha swallowed hard. This was why she had changed. Not for a promotion, not for praise, but for moments like this, where someone who had been made to feel small could walk away feeling just a little bit lighter. She gave a small nod. "Take care," she said. The young woman smiled, and then she was gone. Samantha watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling something she hadn't in a long time. Purpose. For so many years, she had walked through life believing her job was just about efficiency. But it wasn't. It was about people. And today she had chosen to be the kind of person who made a difference. As she walked off the plane, she felt lighter. She had stood up for someone today, and she knew without a doubt that she would do it again. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination? How did you respond? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your story. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button to support Samantha's journey. Subscribe for more stories about courage, kindness, and real-life lessons that make a difference. Samantha had spent months proving herself, not just to Nathaniel, not just to the airline, but to herself. Every interaction, every moment of kindness, every time she chose to do better, had built towards something she never expected. Respect. Not the kind that was demanded, the kind that was earned. It started subtly. A nod from a senior flight attendant when she helped a struggling passenger. A quiet, "nice work today" from a crewmate as they packed up after a long-haul flight. Small things, but they mattered. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was the end of another flight, and the crew was gathered in the debriefing room. The air buzzed with tired energy. Attendants stretched sore shoulders. Pilots checked last-minute paperwork. And then Nathaniel walked in. As always, his presence was commanding, but this time there was something different in his expression. A quiet intensity, like he had been waiting for this moment. "Before we wrap up," he went, his voice steady but firm, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important. Samantha felt her breath hitch, her fingers tightening around the pen in her lap. Was he talking about her? Nathaniel's sharp eyes scanned the room before landing directly on her. I've been watching this team closely, he continued, his tone unreadable, and I've seen some remarkable growth. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, particularly from Samantha. Her heart stopped. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. A few heads turned, eyes flicking toward her. Samantha felt every glance, but instead of shrinking away, she held her head high. She's no longer just a flight attendant, Nathaniel said. She's become a leader. Leader, Samantha's breath caught. She had never thought of herself that way before. She has consistently demonstrated professionalism, kindness, and the ability to handle difficult situations with grace, Nathaniel continued. And most importantly, she's made those around her better. Samantha swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. This was real. This wasn't just a moment of encouragement. This was recognition, earned through sweat, mistakes, and a relentless refusal to stay the person she had once been. A small murmur of approval spread through the room. Then a voice broke the silence. She's helped me a lot, Bethany said, surprising everyone. Samantha turned toward her, stunned. Bethany, the same colleague who had once barely acknowledged her, now looked at her with something new in her expression. Respect. Samantha's chest tightened. Nathaniel nodded, clearly pleased. I want the rest of you to take note, he said, addressing the team. What Samantha has done is what we should all strive for: growth, accountability, excellence. The weight of his words settled deep in her bones. She had spent so long wondering if she was truly changing. Now she knew. The meeting ended and the crew slowly dispersed. But Samantha didn't move. She sat there processing. Then Nathaniel approached. Walk with me, he said simply. Samantha followed him through the quiet terminal, her heart still hammering. They reached a window overlooking the tarmac where the city lights glittered in the distance. Nathaniel turned to her. You deserve that recognition, he said. But tell me, do you believe it yet? Samantha hesitated. Did she? She thought of every moment that had led here, the mistakes, the lessons, the uncomfortable self-reflection. And then she thought of today. Bethany speaking up, Nathaniel's words, the respect in the eyes of her team. She nodded. Yes, she said, her voice steady. I do. Nathaniel's lips curled slightly in approval. Good, he said, then don't stop. Samantha exhaled, feeling something shift inside her. She wouldn't, because for the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was becoming, and she wasn't turning back. Clara never expected that her growth would inspire someone else. She had spent so much time trying to prove herself, to change, to be better, that she hadn't realized the effect she was having on the people around her, especially Bethany. Bethany was the type of flight attendant Clara used to be, strict, no nonsense, and emotionally distant. She followed the rules to a fault, never engaging beyond the bare minimum. Passengers were just part of the job. No unnecessary small talk, no personal connections. Clara had once respected that approach. Now she recognized it for what it was: fear. Fear of getting too involved. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of caring too much. But Clara wasn't that person anymore. And whether Bethany admitted it or not, she noticed. One afternoon during a long-haul flight, Clara found Bethany standing stiffly in the galley, staring blankly at the drink cart. Something about the way her fingers tapped anxiously against the counter made Clara pause. Everything okay? Clara asked gently. Bethany tensed like she was about to brush it off, but then she sighed. She hesitated, glancing away. I don't know how you do it. Clara raised an eyebrow. Do what? Bethany crossed her arms. Be so patient with people, even the ones who are difficult. I've seen you handle passengers who would have made me snap, and somehow you're just calm. Clara was stunned. She had never heard Bethany express doubt before. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke honestly. I wasn't always like this, she admitted. I used to think passengers were just tasks to complete, not people. But I realized that how we treat them and each other matters. Bethany swallowed, looking uncomfortable. I think I've been doing this job wrong, she finally muttered. For years. Clara shook her head. No, you've been doing it the way you were taught. The way a lot of us were taught, but that doesn't mean you can't change. Bethany's eyes flickered with something, relief maybe, or hope. For the first time Clara saw it, Bethany wanted to be better too. She just didn't know how to start, so Clara made it easy. The next time Bethany struggled with a particularly demanding passenger, Clara stepped in, not to take over, but to guide her. The next time she saw Bethany trying to force a polite smile, Clara whispered, "You don't have to fake it. Just talk to them like you mean it." And slowly, Bethany changed too. She started asking passengers about their day. She stopped hurrying through interactions and started actually listening. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when Bethany slipped into old habits, where she caught herself biting back sharp words. But the difference was, she caught herself. One evening after a particularly challenging flight, Bethany found Clara in the crew lounge. "I just wanted to say," Bethany's voice was quieter than usual, "I see what you've been trying to do, and I appreciate it." Clara smiled. This was why she had changed, not just for herself, but because change creates more change. Because when you choose to do better, you give others permission to do the same. Bethany wasn't just a colleague anymore. She was proof that kindness, patience, and understanding could ripple outward, one person at a time. Clara had faced challenging passengers before, but Mr. Thompson was in a league of his own. From the moment he boarded, his demeanor exuded entitlement. He dismissed greetings, demanded immediate attention, and scoffed at any perceived delay. Seated in first class, he seemed to believe that his ticket granted him dominion over the crew. As the flight progressed, his behavior escalated. He complained about the temperature, criticized the meal presentation, and loudly expressed his dissatisfaction with the wine selection. Each interaction was a test of patience, a challenge to maintain composure. Clara approached him with her characteristic professionalism. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you're unhappy with the wine. May I suggest an alternative or perhaps offer you a different beverage?" He sneered. "Do you even know anything about fine wines? I doubt it." Taking a steadying breath, Clara replied, "I apologize if our selection doesn't meet your expectations. I'll do my best to find an option you'll enjoy." Behind her calm exterior, Clara felt the weight of the situation. In the past, such confrontations might have rattled her, but now she saw them as opportunities to demonstrate her growth. As she turned to retrieve another bottle, she caught Marcus's eye. He had been observing the exchange, ready to step in if needed. But seeing Clara's composed handling of the situation, he gave a subtle nod of approval. Returning to Mr. Thompson, Clara presented a different wine. "This is a Cabernet Sauvignon from our reserve selection. I hope it meets your standards." He took a sip, paused, and then gave a curt nod. "It's acceptable." "I'm glad to hear that," Clara responded, maintaining her poise. The rest of the flight continued with minor grievances from Mr. Thompson, but Clara handled each with unwavering professionalism. Her demeanor set the tone for the cabin, and other passengers took note of her calm authority. Upon landing, as passengers disembarked, Mr. Thompson paused beside Clara. For a moment, it seemed he might offer a word of thanks, but instead he simply adjusted his jacket and walked on. Marcus approached her afterward. "You handled that exceptionally well," he remarked. "Situations like that can easily escalate, but you kept everything under control." Clara smiled, a mix of relief and pride washing over her. "Thank you, Marcus. I just focused on staying calm and addressing his concerns as best as I could." "It's clear you've grown into a true leader, Clara," Marcus continued. "Your ability to manage difficult situations with grace sets a standard for all of us." His words resonated deeply with Clara. She had worked hard to reach this point, transforming challenges into opportunities for growth. This encounter with Mr. Thompson wasn't just about handling a difficult passenger. It was a testament to her evolution as a professional and a leader. As she left the aircraft, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Each experience, whether positive or negative, had shaped her into the person she was today. And with each challenge, she found new strength within herself, ready to face whatever came next. Clara stood at the threshold of the bustling airport terminal, her crisp uniform immaculate, the emblem of the airline gleaming on her lapel. The cacophony of announcements, rolling suitcases, and hurried footsteps filled the air, a symphony of organized chaos she had come to know intimately over the years. Yet, today felt different. Reflecting on her journey, Clara recalled her early days as a flight attendant. Back then, she had been meticulous, adhering strictly to protocols, ensuring every procedure was followed to the letter. Her interactions with passengers were polite but distant, her demeanor professional yet detached. She believed that maintaining a barrier was essential to uphold authority and efficiency. However, as time passed, Clara began to notice the subtle nuances of human behavior. The anxious tap of a passenger's foot, the weary slump of shoulders after a long journey, the gleam of excitement in a child's eyes boarding a plane for the first time. These observations stirred something within her, prompting a shift in her perspective. One pivotal moment etched in her memory was a flight during a turbulent storm. The aircraft had been tossed like a leaf in the wind, and fear was palpable among the passengers. Clara had moved through the cabin, offering reassuring words, holding trembling hands, and even sharing a quiet song with a frightened child. It was then she realized that her role transcended beyond safety demonstrations and service. She was a caretaker of souls in transit. Embracing this newfound understanding, Clara's interactions evolved. She took the time to listen to passengers' stories, shared in their joys and sorrows, and offered empathy where it was needed most. Her colleagues noticed the change, often seeking her guidance on handling delicate situations. Her reputation for compassion and leadership blossomed, and she became a cornerstone of the crew, a beacon of calm and kindness. Her transformation did not go unnoticed by the airline's management. Marcus, the senior flight operations manager, had observed Clara's growth with admiration. He saw in her the embodiment of the airline's core values and recognized her potential to inspire others. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging flight where Clara had deftly managed a medical emergency and soothed frayed nerves, Marcus approached her. His expression was one of genuine respect. "Clara," he began, "I've watched you grow from a diligent flight attendant into a compassionate leader. Your ability to connect with passengers and crew alike is remarkable. We need more individuals like you to shape the future of our airline." Clara felt a swell of emotion. The acknowledgement of her journey, the recognition of her efforts, it was both humbling and empowering. "Thank you, Marcus," she replied, her voice steady. "I've come to realize that our job is not just about reaching destinations, but about making the journey meaningful for everyone on board." Impressed by her insight, Marcus offered her a leadership role within the airline's training program. He believed Clara's experiences and empathetic approach could cultivate a new generation of flight attendants who viewed their roles through a more holistic lens. Accepting the position, Clara poured her heart into the training sessions. She shared anecdotes, both triumphant and challenging, encouraging trainees to see passengers as individuals with unique stories. She emphasized the importance of empathy, patience, and the profound impact of small acts of kindness. One day during a training session, a young trainee named Sophie approached Clara, her eyes reflecting a mix of uncertainty and hope. "Clara," she began hesitantly, "I've always admired how you handle situations with such grace, but sometimes I feel overwhelmed, especially when faced with difficult passengers. How do you manage to stay so composed?" Clara smiled warmly, recalling her own early insecurities. "Sophie, it's natural to feel that way. What helped me was understanding that everyone has their own battles. When a passenger is difficult, it's often not about you but something they're going through. By approaching them with empathy, you not only help them, but also find strength within yourself." Sophie nodded, absorbing the wisdom. "I hope I can be as strong as you someday." "You already are," Clara assured her, recognizing the need for empathy as the first step toward embodying it. As months turned into years, Clara's influence permeated the airline. The culture shifted from one of rigid professionalism to compassionate service. Passenger satisfaction soared, and the airline received accolades for its exceptional crew. Clara's leadership became a testament to the power of empathy and personal growth. Reflecting on her journey, Clara understood that her transformation was not just about changing her approach to work, but about evolving as a person. She had learned that true leadership stemmed from understanding and connecting with others on a human level. Lessons from Clara's story: embrace empathy, understanding others' perspectives fosters compassion and strengthens relationships. Lead by example. Demonstrating the qualities you wish to see in others inspires them to follow suit. Continuous growth. Personal and professional development in a lifelong journey that enriches your life and those around you. Face challenges with grace. Difficult situations are opportunities to showcase resilience and kindness. Value every individual. Recognizing the unique stories and struggles of others creates a more inclusive and supportive environment. As Clara stood before a new batch of trainees, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey had come full circle, from a novice flight attendant to a leader molding the future. Remember, she addressed the eager faces before her. Our job is not just to transport passengers from one place to another. It's to make their journey memorable, to touch their lives in ways they may never forget. Lead with your hearts, and the rest will follow. The room erupted in applause, the trainees inspired by Clara's words and the authenticity behind them. Dear readers, if Clara's journey has touched you or inspired you in any way, please leave a comment below to encourage her and others who strive to make a difference. Your support means the world. Like this story to show appreciation for Clara's dedication and leadership. Subscribe to our channel for more uplifting and inspiring stories that remind us of the profound impact of empathy and personal growth. Thank you for being a part of our community. Together, let's continue to spread kindness and support one another on our journeys.